how are you? Monday. So I want to just do a quick little video as a follow-up to the NHS consultation one that I did, because quite a lot of people have commented across a number of different platforms, and then it sort of struck me that one of the problems with doing multiple recordings, many hours of speaking, is that obviously people haven't watched the videos, and why would they? But over a number of hours, you've built a number of different explanations as to how you've kind of got from A to Z. So I thought I just wanted to summarise that. So my comments are really cumulative; they're not about any one person's comments, and I just thought it was kind of important that we take this opportunity, because this is the end game now. We're in terms of getting these points across in these documents. The stakes could not even really be higher. And whilst there is much to celebrate, and many people are celebrating, and that's absolutely fantastic, I am also incredibly sad that there is this general acceptance that people are willing to kind of abandon parents at this point and walk away and leave us with gender ideology being left in schools for us to have to deal with. And quite a lot of people are saying, that within the documents there is no gender ideology language. Apart from it saying that there is assigned at birth. And I'm sorry to say that that's just a ruse. They know it, that there is, and that's not true. So I just want to talk about that and what that means, and I'm just going to unpack it, and we're going to have to define it in order to be very explicit. And we're going to talk about what gender identity means, what gender dysphoria means, and what gender incongruence means, and why quite a lot of people who are deemed to be hardline want us not to cede language, and why this is absolutely vital. So we'll go through that. So let's look at, again, I've already done a video on what is gender identity and why I call it magical thinking. And yes, you can say that's kind of a very trite way of looking at it, but I don't have a gender identity. My child doesn't have a gender identity. So I don't want her to be taught about 101 gender identities and for her to be confused in that way. I don't find the term gender useful at all. I have a sex. My child has a sex. All my children have sexed bodies. If you look at gender identity, and of course being a eunuch is a gender identity, a recognised gender identity for many people. The NHS recognises gender identity in the following way. It says, it refers to our sense of who we are and how we see and describe ourselves, right? So if you then move into gender dysphoria, they say it's a term that describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. And of course, gender identity came about because of these, completely and utterly ridiculously vile characters, one of whom conducted sexual experiments on children. I genuinely don't want to take part in anything like that, and I don't see why my children should, or your children, or anyone else's children. So I actually fail to see why anyone in the gender critical movement would say that they want to leave the terms gender identity behind. Now, the rush for everyone who sees themselves as fitting under this ginormous trans umbrella, and calling themselves self-defining as having a gender dysphoria, this sense of unease and dissatisfaction, which can be so intense that it can lead to depression, anxiety, and have a harmful impact on their daily life. And a lot of that comes down to body dysmorphia, and the gender incongruence, which was the term which was introduced by the ICD-10 with the World Health Organization, mean, that's just along similar lines where we've got where you, to refer to the experience of having a gender that does not match the sex you were assigned at birth. Transgender is an umbrella term to describe people whose gender is not the same or does not sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. So this, for the absolute avoidance of doubt, this is gender captured language. This is the language of ideology, ideologues, right? So I reject it fundamentally. This is what I mean by magical thinking, nonsense, their language. We don't need to use it. It's not our job to be kind, okay? People who want to be kind, for some reason, people seem to be suggesting that they need to meet people halfway, right? This is not our role, right? They're not going to be meeting us halfway. This is not like some little nice compromise in a car park where we're all meeting each other halfway. And we're going to go, oh, okay, you want this, oh, you want that. This is not happening. What we're talking about is making something happen. This is about setting up clinical services, right? So when you've all gone away, back to your jobs, clinicians are going to be left to sort this out. So I'm not really entirely sure why you can't continue to help us get rid of this, okay? Why are you going to also leave parents with this in schools for their kids and for the next generation? Because essentially what you've said is that, you know, we've got this huge problem, a drug problem, for want of a better analogy, but you're not going to remove the source of the drugs, right? So if you don't stop it at source, then you're not going to really stop the problem. So you have to at least try to see our point of view on this seeding language issue, rather than just shut us down and shut us out of the debate. Because essentially that's what you're doing when you're saying, I don't see any gender ideology in this report, right? That's just being obtuse, and it's clearly not true, because you do understand that. So, you know. So what I'm arguing for is that we don't use the word gender at all. There's absolutely no need for the word gender. In fact, the word gender has got so contaminated, we need to stop using it. Just use the word sex. Sex, body dysmorphia. That will suffice. And if we actually did this, because what I find in schools is they'll start off in policies, and they'll if they use the word sex, by further down the page they've already swapped it into the word gender, and then they do further swap into gender identity, and then boom, that's the gateway, and it's all over. Everything is gender identity from there on in. It's really, really important, this little language play. You know, we've got this pathologized condition, which we're saying, you know, it's not a mental health condition, but it requires treatment from psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, endocrinologists, potentially surgeons, you know, once they're over 18, physicians, all of these different multidisciplinary teams. But we're not actually we're allowed to call it, you know, a mental health condition anymore. But we are still saying, what you're saying, some people are saying, is they're happy for these kids to be chemically castrated, and that because it might be within a research trial, that those kids might be able to consent, right? So because they're in a research trial, they will be able to understand the idea of not ever being able to have sexual gratification or to have children. And because they're signing the documentation that they're in a trial, their level of understanding will somehow be different than if they weren't in a research trial. That will improve their cognitive understanding and consent capacity. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that's true. So I would like that to be removed, because I don't agree that those children, you know, her child, his child, will be able to consent ever, or that they should be chemically castrated and have a whole host of side effects potentially. I don't think that is a decision, and that changes because there is some ethics committee and research methodology applied to that. Another point of which I think is interesting is, what people's arguments are going to be. If you again come back and you imagine that you're sitting in the clinical arena, at what point are you considering that you're potentially pathologizing autistic people and LGB people within this medical framework that you're setting up? Because when you're validating these concepts of gender identity, gender ideology, gender incongruence, you're essentially assigning these labels to people who we are saying, and we say in a million different tweets and ways and papers, that we know that these are probably sexuality kids and high proportion are on the spectrum. How are you? Can you see the point at which this medicalization and pathologization is essentially harmful by medicalizing it? If you look at the impact of GLAAD, who are still operating, within this whole system, the World Health Organization, who, God, what a lucky escape! I nearly went to work for them at one point when I was working in the AIDS field. Stonewall and a million of other organisations who set up, all of these different words, who they very quickly got them into common parlance. And essentially what they were doing, obviously, was trying to confuse everyone, but more clearly was to establish a pathway in many respects for autogynephilia to be validated on the back of children. Because obviously, as we know, if we can get children involved, then it makes it seem way more reasonable for adults to be able to play out their sexual fetish, and to make children seem like they're the ones who are unwell. I'd really like you to think about this setting healthcare professionals up with a situation where you've got these different populations presenting, but they're already in a pathologized situation because of the language which has been verified by yourselves, and anyone who's agreeing with this situation, where you've got these different populations. You've got the body dysmorphia population who are suffering and feeling incredibly difficult about their sexed bodies. You've got the social hysteria population who are really struggling with all of the confusion which has come about, and undoubtedly they have many other mental health problems that are riding on the crest of this wave. But all of these kids are going to be entering into this big fat NHS system, and already this is stretched beyond capacity. You've already, if you know anyone who's got a kid who is using CAMS, for instance, who has got some kind of mental health problem, eating disorder, for example, you'll know that they're already stretched and really, really struggling to supply psychotherapy, psychiatry, or if you think about the waiting list for autism, etc. You're now going to throw in this absolute huge amounts of autistic kids, geeky kids, LGB kids, confused kids, upset kids. At what point are you going to try and see that we have to stop the source of this? This is the problem. We actually have to stop the source, and the source of this is agreeing that gender identity is a thing, right? If you turn off that tab, you may be able to have a chance of stopping thousands more children going into this system every year. How do you rescue young people who've got autism? So the first thing we can do is stop confusing them, right? And to stop confusing them is to get rid of this being taught in schools at all. No more gender identity, no more gender ideology being taught in schools. This is the source, right? Stop the source. Stop using the terms gender identity. Because when I go into the schools, when I talk to literally, I can't tell you how many parents every single day These are the battles that I have to wage over and over and over with head teachers, governors. It all comes down to this: language, gender identity. The whole point of the Forstater ruling, thank you Maya, is that we can say we're gender critical, we do not believe in gender ideology, and yet you want us to leave it in this document. I would absolutely, if you walk away from this whole thing, understanding people with autism a bit more, considering that, you know, there's a lot of discussion about, we need to help people, you know, these kids who are on the spectrum, and, you know, we care very much about them, and I'm absolutely sure you do care about them. But you know what? I hear so much prejudice within the gender critical movement towards people with autism. You would not believe the little comments, and I'm absolutely sure that people do not realise that they're doing it, but constantly, and I get a lot of it myself, they're constantly undermining people with autism, because as soon as they say things like, oh, well, you know, they're very black and white, and they start discrediting their arguments because, oh, well, they can't see nuance. And the one thing, and they say it to me, and I'm sure people say it because they'll discredit the way, even the work that I'm doing now, because they'll say, well, she doesn't see nuance. Well, you see, that's not true, because I can see it, and I can see the different arguments. What I'm choosing to do is to set aside, because I disagree with your point of view, and I actually do think that on this occasion that I am correct. That's the main thing, really, that I've got to say about it. You know, there's gaslighting going on. People do say that there's gender ideology language in the NHS consultation. Yes, it's a great step forward. Yes, there's much has been achieved, but there's a little bit of abandonment going on now. And I'm really sad about that people have decided that they're going to, you know, leave parents with the rest of it in situ. And yes, I believe that because I'm, you know, living and breathing it on a daily basis, and I know what's going on in schools. And if those words are left behind, I'm going to be doing this literally forever, picking up the pieces, because, you know, it's still going to be there. Because I know what's going to come out from the Department for Education if we continue along this road of leaving this behind. I also know what the NHS is doing and what the likelihood of this all panning out. Because I have spent 30 years doing it in the NHS, so I'm not naive to it. And I'm really worried about it. You know, there isn't just like this huge, big set up just waiting to scoop these kids up. You know, there's just not tons and tons of psychologists and psychotherapists and psychiatrists with huge gaps in their caseload just waiting to scoop up another number of thousands of kids. We have to stop it at source, and as far as I can tell from the analysis I've done, stopping it at source is the main thing we need to do.